Hello, welcome back to Boring Fantasy for Sleep. Tonight is episode 8 of The King of Elfland's Daughter by Lord Dunsany. In episode 7, the novel showed us its full geometry for the first time. 3 people looking in 3 directions. Luraloo sat in the fields we know and watched the ordinary ways of men and found them extraordinary. A man repairing a gate, children in a lane, smoke from chimneys at dusk. He watched all of it with Elfland eyes and found each thing a wonder. And Alveric walked east, as he has been walking for years. The border always further, the pale blue mountains always retreating. He does not stop. He will not stop. And Lyrizel stood in the golden air of Elfland, in the world she was made for, and remembered. She thought about grey mornings, about cold, about Orion as a small child, about all the ordinary things she did not know she loved, until they were behind the border, and the Elf King watched his daughter remember, and understood what his love had cost her. Tonight, something shifts. Alveric is closer than he has been in years. The horn sounds across the marshes, and Lyrizel, in Elfland, turns and looks west toward the fields we know, toward the smoke of Earl, toward the life she chose and lost, and has not stopped thinking about. The geometry is still the same, but something is beginning to give. This is episode 8, The Horn of Alveric, chapters 25, 26, 27, 28, and 29.
Chapter 25. Lyrizel remembers the fields we know. As the trolls scurried earthwards to laugh at the ways of man, Lyrizel stirred where she sat on her father's knee, who, grave and calm on his throne of mist and ice, had hardly moved for 12 of our earthly years. She sighed, and the sigh rippled over the fells of dream, and lightly troubled Elfland, and the dawns and the sunsets and twilight, and the pale blue glow of stars that are blended together forever to be the light of Elfland, felt a faint touch of sorrow, and all their radiance shook. For the magic that caught these lights, and the spells that bound them together, to illumine forever the land that owes no allegiance to time, were not so strong as a sorrow, rising dark from a royal mood of a princess of the elvish line. She sighed, for through her long content, and across the calm of Elfland, there had floated a thought of earth, so that in the midmost splendours of Elfland, of which song can barely tell, she called to mind common cowslips, and many a trivial weed of the fields we know. And walking in those fields, she saw in fancy Orion, upon the other side of the boundary of twilight, remote from her by she knew not what waste of years, and the magical glories of Elfland and its beauty beyond our dreaming, and the deep, deep calm in which ages slept, unhurt, unhurried by time, and the art of her father that guarded the least of the lilies from fading, and the spells by which he made. Daydreams and yearnings true held her fancy no longer from roving, nor contented her any more. And so her sigh blew over the magical land and slightly troubled the flowers. And her father felt her sorrow, and knew that it troubled the flowers, and knew that it shook the calm that lay upon Elfland, though no more than a bird would shake a regal curtain, fluttering against its folds, when wandering lost upon a summer's night. And though he knew too it was but for earth that she sorrowed, preferring some mundane way to the midmost glories of Elfland, as she sat with him on the throne that may only be told of in song. Yet even this moved nothing in his magical heart but compassion, as we might pity a child who in fanes that to us seemed sacred might be found to be sighing for some trivial thing. And the more that earth seemed to him unworthy of sorrow, being soon come soon gone, the helpless prey of time, an evanescent appearance seen off the coasts of Elfland, too brief for the graver care of a mind weighted with magic, the more he pitied his child for her errant whim that had rashly wandered here and become entangled, alas, with the things that pass away. Ah, well, she was not content. He felt no wrath against earth that had lured her fancies away. She was not content with the innermost splendours of Elfland, but she sighed for something more. His tremendous art should give it. So he raised his right arm up from the thing whereon it rested, a part of his mystical throne that was made of music and mirage. He raised his right arm up, and a hush fell over Elfland. The great leaves ceased from their murmur through the green deeps of the forest. Silent as carven marble were fabulous bird and monster, and the brown trolls scampering earthwards, all halted suddenly hushed. Then out of the hush rose little murmurs of yearning, little sounds as of longing for things that no songs can say. Sounds like the voices of tears if each little salt drop could live and be given a voice to tell of the ways of grief. Then all these little rumours danced gravely into a melody that the master of Elfland called up with his magical hand, and the melody told of dawn coming up over infinite marshes, far away upon earth, or some planet that Elfland did not know, growing slowly out of deep darkness and starlight and bitter cold, powerless, chilly and cheerless, scarce overcoming the stars, obscured by shadows of thunder and hated by all things dark, enduring, growing and glowing, until through the gloom of the marshes and across the chill of the air came all in a glorious moment the splendour of colour. And dawn went onward with this triumphant thing, and the blackest clouds turned slowly rose and rode in a sea of lilac, and the darkest rocks that had guarded night shone now with a golden glow. And when his melody could say no more of this wonder that had forever been foreign to all the elvish dominions, then the king moved his hand where he held it high, as one might beckon to birds, and called up a dawn over Elfland, luring it from some planet of those that are nearest the sun. And fresh and fair though it came from beyond the bourne of geography, and out of an age long lost and beyond history's ken, a dawn glowed upon Elfland that had known no dawn before. And the dewdrops of Elfland slung from the bended tips of the grasses gathered in that dawn to their tiny spheres, and held there shining and wonderful that glory of skies such as ours, the first they had ever seen. And the dawn grew strangely and slowly over those unwanted lands, pouring upon them the colours that day after day are daffodils, and day after day are wild roses, through all the weeks of their season, drink deep with voluptuous assemblies in utterly silent riot. And a gleam that was new to the forest appeared on the long, strange leaves, and shadows unknown to Elfland slipped out from the monstrous tree boles and stole over grasses that had not dreamed of their advent, and the spires of that palace, perceiving a wonder, less lovely indeed than they, yet knew that the stranger was magic, and uttered an answering gleam from their sacred windows that flashed over elvish fells like an inspiration, and mingled a flush of rose with the blue of the elfin mountains, and watchers on wonderful peaks that gazed from their crags for ages, lest from earth or from any star should come a stranger to Elfland, saw the first blush of the sky as it felt the coming of dawn, and raised their horns and blew that call that warned Elfland against a stranger. And the guardians of savage valleys lifted horns of fabulous bulls and blew the call again in the dark of their awful precipices. An echo carried it on from the monstrous marble faces of rocks that repeated the call to all their barbarous company. So Elfland rang with the warning that a strange thing troubled her coast. And to the land thus expectant, thus watchful, with magical sabres elate along lonely crags, summoned from blackened scabbards by those horns to repel an enemy, dawn came now wide, now golden, the old wonder we know, and the palace with every marvel and with all its charms and enchantments flashed out of its ice-blue radiance, a glory of welcome or rivalry, adding to Elfland a splendour of which only song may say. It was then that the elfin king moved his hand again, where he held it high by the crystal spires of his crown, and waved away through the walls of his magical palace, and showed to Lirazel the unmeasured leagues of his kingdom. And she saw by magic, for so long as his fingers made that spell, the dark green forests and all the fells of Elfland, and the solemn pale blue mountains and the valleys that weird folk guarded, and all the creatures of fable that crept in the dark of huge leaves, and the riotous trolls as they scampered away towards earth. She saw the watchers lift their horns to their lips, while there flashed a light on the horns that was the proudest triumph of the hidden art of her father. The light of a dawn lured over unthinkable spaces to appease his daughter and comfort her whims and recall her fancies from earth. She saw the lawns whereon time had idled for centuries, withering not one bloom of all the boundary of flowers, and the new light coming upon the lawns she loved, through the heavy colour of Elfland, gave them a beauty that they had never known until dawn made this boundless journey to meet the enchanted twilight. And all the while, there glowed and flashed and glittered those palace spires of which only song may tell. From that bewildering beauty, he turned his eyes away and looked in his daughter's face to see the wonder with which she would welcome her glorious home, as her fancies came back from the fields of age and death, whither, alas, they had wandered. And though her eyes were turned to the elfin mountains, whose mystery and whose blue they strangely matched, yet as the elf king looked in those eyes, for which alone he had lured the dawn so far from its natural courses, he saw in their magical deeps a thought of earth, though he had lifted his arm and made a mystical sign with all his might to bring a wonder to Elfland that should content her with home. And all his dominions had exulted in this, and the watchers on awful crags had blown strange calls, and monster and insect and bird and flower had rejoiced with a new joy. And there in the centre of Elfland, his daughter thought of earth. Had he shown her any wonder but dawn, he might have lured home that fancy. But in bringing this exotic beauty to Elfland, to blend with its ancient wonders, he awoke memories of morning coming over fields that he knew not, and Lirazel played in fancy in fields once more with Orion, where grew the unenchanted earthly flowers amongst the English grasses. "Is it not enough?" he said, in his strange, rich, magical voice, and pointed across his wide lands with the fingers that summoned wonder. She sighed. It was not enough. And sorrow came upon that enchanted king. He had only his daughter, and she sighed for earth. There had been once a queen that had reigned with him over Elfland, but she was mortal, and being mortal, died. For she would often stray to the hills of earth to see the May again, or to see the beech woods in autumn. And though she stayed but a day, when she came to the fields we know, and was back in the palace beyond the twilight before our sun had set, yet time found her whenever she came, and so she wore away. And soon she died in Elfland, for she was only a mortal. And wandering elves had buried her, as one buries the daughters of men. And now the king was all alone with his daughter, and she had just sighed for earth. Sorrow was on him, but out of the dark of that sorrow arose, as often with men, and went up singing out of his mourning mind, an inspiration gleaming with laughter and joy. He stood up then, and raised up both his arms, and his inspiration broke over Elfland in music. And with the tide of that music, there went like the strength of the sea, an impulse to rise and dance, which none in Elfland resisted. Gravely, he waved his arms and the music floated from them. And all that stalked through the forest, and all that crept upon leaves, all that leaped among craggy heights, or browsed upon acres of lilies, all things in all manner of places, yea, the sentinel guarding his presence, the lonely, mountain watchers, and the trolls as they scampered towards earth, all danced to a tune that was made of the spirit of spring, arrived on an earthly morning amongst happy herds of goats. And the trolls were very near to the frontier now, their faces already puckered to laugh at the ways of men. They were hurrying with all the eagerness of small vain things to be over the twilight that lies between Elfland and earth. Now they went forward no longer, but only glided in circles and intricate spirals, dancing some such dance as the gnats in summer evenings dance over the fields we know. And grave monsters of fable, in deeps of the ferny forest, danced minuets that witches had made of their whims and their laughter. Long ago, in their youth before cities had come to the world. And the trees of the forest heavily lifted slow roots out of the ground and swayed upon them uncouthly, and then danced as on monstrous claws. And the insects danced on the huge waving leaves. And in the dark of long caverns weird things in, enchanted seclusion rose out of their age-long sleep and danced in the damp. And beside the wizard king stood, swaying slightly to the rhythm that had set dancing all magical things, the Princess Lyrazel, with that faint gleam on her face that shone from a hidden smile. For she secretly smiled forever at the power of her great beauty, and all in a sudden moment the elf king raised one hand higher and held it high, and stilled all that danced in Elfland, and gripped by a sudden awe all magical things, and sent over Elfland a melody, all made of notes he had caught from wandering inspirations that sing and stray through limpid blue beyond our earthly coast. And all the land lay deep in the magic of that strange music, and the wild things that earth has guessed at, and the things hidden even from legend, were moved to sing age-old songs that their memories had forgotten, and fabulous things of the air were lured downwards out of great heights, and emotions unknown and unthought of troubled the calm of Elfland. The flood of music beat with wonderful waves against the slopes of the grave blue elfin mountains, till their precipices uttered strange bronze-like echoes. On earth, no noise was heard of music or echo. Not a note came through the narrow border of twilight. Not a sound, not a murmur. Elsewhere those notes ascended, and passed like rare, strange moths through all the fields of heaven, and hummed like untraceable memories about the souls of the blessed. And the angels heard that music, but were forbidden to envy it. And though it came not to earth, and though never our fields have heard the music of Elfland, yet there were then, as there have been in every age, lest despair should overtake the peoples of earth, those that make songs for the need of our grief and our laughter. And even they heard never a note from Elfland across the border of twilight that kills their sound, but they felt in their minds the dance of those magical notes, and wrote them down, and earthly instruments played them, then and never, till then, have we heard the music of Elfland. For a while, the Elf King held all things that owed him allegiance, and all their desires and wonders and fears and dreams, floating drowsy on tides of music that was made of no sounds of earth, but rather of that dim substance in which the planets swim, with many another marvel that only magic knows. And then, as all Elfland was drinking the music in, as our earth drinks in soft rain, he turned again to his daughter, with that in his eyes that said, "What land is so fair as ours?" And she turned towards him to say, "Here is my home forever." Her lips were parted to say it, and love was shining in the blue of her elfin eyes. She was stretching her fair hands out towards her father, when they heard the sound of the horn of a tired hunter, wearily blowing by the border of earth. Chapter 26. The Horn of Alveric. Northward to lonely lands through wearying years, Alveric wandered, where windy fragments of his grey gaunt tent added a gloom to chill evenings, and the folk upon lonely farms, as they lit the lights in their houses, and the ricks began to darken against the pale green of the sky, would sometimes hear the rap of the mallets of Niv and Zend coming clear through the hush from the land that no others trod, and their children, peering from casements to see if a star was come, would see perhaps the queer grey shape of that tent flapping its tatters above the last of the hedgerows, where a moment before was only the grey of the gloaming. On the next morning, there would be guesses and wonderings, and the joy and fear of the children, and the tales that their elders told them, and the explorations by stealth to the edge of the fields of men, shy peerings through dim green gaps in the last of the hedgerows, though to look toward the east was forbidden, and rumours and expectations, and all these things were blended together by this wonder that came from the east, and so passed into legend, which lived for many a year beyond. That morning, but Alveric and his tent would be gone, so day by day and season after season, that company wandered on, the lonely, mateless man, the moonstruck lad and the madman, and that old grey tent with its long twisted pole. And all the stars became known to them, and all the four winds familiar, and rain and mist and hail, but the flow of yellow windows all warm and welcome. At night they knew only to say farewell to. With the earliest light in the first chill of dawn, Alveric would awake from impatient dreams, and Niv would arise shouting, and away they would go upon their crazed crusade before any sign of awakening appeared on the quiet dim gables. And every morning Niv prophesied that they would surely find Elfland, and the days wore away, and the years. Thiel had long left them, Thiel who prophesied victory to them in burning. Song, whose inspirations cheered Alveric on coldest nights and led him through rockiest ways. Thiel sang one evening suddenly songs of some young girl's hair. Thiel, who should have led their wanderings. And then, one day, in the gloaming, a blackbird singing, the May in bloom for miles, he turned for the houses of men and married the maiden, and was one no more with any band of wanderers. The horses were dead. Niv and Zend carried all they had on the pole. Many years had gone. One autumn morning, Alveric left the camp to go to the houses of men. Niv and Zend eyed each other. Why should Alveric seek to ask the way of others? For somehow or other, their mad minds knew his purpose more swiftly than sane intuitions. Had he not Niv's prophecies to guide him? And the things that Zend had been told on oath by the full moon? Alveric came to the houses of men, and of the folk he questioned few would speak at all of things that lay to the east, and if he spoke of the lands through which he had wandered for years, they gave as little heed as if he were telling them that he had pitched his tent on the coloured layers of air that glowed and drifted and darkened in the low sky over the sunset. And the few that answered him said one thing only, that only the wizards knew. When he had learned this, Alveric went back from the fields and hedgerows and came again to his old grey tent in the lands of which none thought. And Niv and Zend sat there silent, eyeing him sideways, for they knew he mistrusted madness and things said by the moon. And next day, when they moved their camp in the chill of dawn, Niv led the way without shouting. They had not gone for many more weeks upon their curious journey when Alveric met one morning at the edge of the fields men tended, one filling his bucket at a well, whose thin, high conical hat and mystical air proclaimed him surely a wizard. "Master," said Alveric, "of those arts men dread, I have a question that I would ask of the future." And the wizard turned from his bucket to look at Alveric with doubtful eyes, for the traveller's tattered figure seemed scarce to promise such fees as are given by those that justly question the future. And such as those fees are, the wizard named them, and Alveric's wallet held that which banished the doubts of the wizard, so that he pointed to where the tip of his tower peered over a cluster of myrtles, and prayed Alveric to come to his door when the evening star should appear, and in that propitious hour he would make the future clear to him. And again, Niv and Zen knew well that their leader followed after dreams and mysteries that came not from madness, nor from the moon. And he left them, sitting still and saying nothing, but with minds full of fierce visions. Through pale air, waiting for the evening star, Alveric walked over the fields men tended, and came to the dark oak door of the wizard's tower, which myrtles brushed against with every breeze. A young apprentice in wizardry opened the door and, by ancient wooden steps that the rats knew better than men, led Alveric to the wizard's upper room. The wizard had on a silken cloak of black, which he held to be due to the future. Without it, he would not question the years to be. And when the young apprentice had gone away, he moved to a volume he had on a high desk, and turned from the volume to Alveric to ask what he sought of the future. And Alveric asked him how he should come to Elfland. Then the wizard opened the great book's darkened cover and turned the pages therein. And for a long while, all the pages he turned were blank, but further on in the book, much writing appeared, although of no kind that Alveric had ever seen. And the wizard explained that such books as these told of all things, but that he, being only concerned with the years to be, had no need to read of the past, and had therefore acquired a book that told of the future only, though he might have had more than this from the College of Wizardry, had he cared to study the follies already committed by man. Then he read for a while in his book, and Alveric heard the rats returning softly to the streets and houses that they had made in the stairs. And then the wizard found what he sought of the future, and told Alveric that it was written in his book how he never should come to Elfland while he carried a magical sword. When Alveric heard this, he paid the wizard's fees and went away doleful. For he knew the perils of Elfland, which no common sabre forged on the anvils of men could ever avail to parry. He did not know that the magic that was in his sword left a flavour or taste on the air like that of lightning, which passed through the border of twilight and spread over Elfland, nor knew that the Elf King learned of his presence thus, and drew his frontier away from him, so that Alveric should trouble his realm no more. But he believed what the wizard had read to him out of his book, and so went doleful away, and leaving the stairs of oak to time and the rats, he passed out of the grove of myrtles and over the fields of men, and came again to that melancholy spot where his grey tent brooded mournfully in the wilderness, dull and silent as Niv and Zend sitting beside it. And after that, they turned and wandered southwards. For all journeys now seemed equally hopeless to Alveric, who would not give up his sword to meet magical perils without magical aid. And Niv and Zend obeyed him silently, no longer guiding him with raving prophecies or with things said by the moon, for they knew he had taken counsel with another. By weary ways with lonely wanderings, they came far to the south, and never the border of Elfland appeared with its heavy layers of twilight. Yet Alveric would never give up his sword, for well he guessed that Elfland dreaded its magic, and had poor hope of recapturing Lyrazel with any blade that was dreadful only to men. And after a while, Niv prophesied again, and Zend would come late on nights of the full moon to wake Alveric with his tales. And for all the mystery that was in Zend when he spoke, and for all the exultation of Niv when he prophesied, Alveric knew by now that the tales and the prophecies were empty and vain, and that neither of these would ever bring him to Elfland. With this mournful knowledge in a desolate land, he still struck camp at dawn, still marched, still sought for the frontier. And so the months went by. And one day, where the edge of earth was a wild, untended heath, running down to the rocky waste in which Alveric had camped, he saw at evening a woman in the hat and cloak of a witch, sweeping the heath with a broom, and each stroke as she swept the heath was away from the fields we know, away to the rocky waste, eastwards towards Elfland. Big gusts of black, dried earth and puffs of sand were blowing towards Alveric from every powerful stroke. He walked towards her from his sorry encampment and stood near and watched her sweeping. But still she laboured at her vigorous work, striding away behind dust from the fields we know, and sweeping as she strode. And after a while, she lifted her face as she swept and looked at Alveric, and he saw that it was the witch Zirundarul. After all these years, he saw that witch again, and she saw beneath the flapping rags of his cloak that sword that she had made for him once on her hill. Its scabbard of leather could not hide from the witch that it was that very sword, for she knew the flavour of magic that rose from it faintly and floated wide through the evening. "Mother Witch," said Alveric, and she curtsied low to him, magical though she was, and aged by the passing of years that had been before Alveric's father, and though many an earl had forgotten their lord by now, yet she had not forgotten. He asked her what she was doing there, on the heath with her broom in the evening. "Sweeping the world," she said. And Alveric wondered what rejected things she was sweeping away from the world, with grey dust mournfully turning over and over, as it drifted across our fields, going slowly into the darkness that was gathering beyond our coast. "Why are you sweeping the world, Mother Witch?" he said. "There's things in the world that ought not to be here," said she. He looked wistfully then at the rolling grey clouds from her broom that were all drifting towards Elfland. "Mother Witch," he said, "can I go too? I have looked for 12 years for Elfland and have not found a glimpse of the Elfin mountains." And the old witch looked kindly at him, and then she glanced at his sword. "He's afraid of my magic," she said, and thought or mystery dawned in her eyes as she spoke. "Who?" said Alveric, and Zirundarul lowered her eyes. The king," she said. And then she told him how that enchanted monarch would draw away from whatever had worsted him once, and with him draw all that he had, never supporting the presence of any magic that was the equal of his. And Alveric could not believe that such a king cared so much for the magic he had in his old black scabbard. "It is his way," she said. And then he would not believe that he had waved away Elfland. "He has the power," said she. And still Alveric would face this terrible king and all the powers he had. But wizard and witch had warned him that he could not go with his sword, and how go unarmed through the grisly woods against the palace of wonder? For to go there with any sword from the anvils of men was but to go unarmed. "Mother witch," he cried, "may I come no more to Elfland?" And the longing and grief in his voice touched the witch's heart and moved it to magical pity. "You shall go," she said. He stood there, half despair in the mournful evening, half dreams of Lyrizel, while the witch from under her cloak drew forth a small false weight which once she had taken away from a cellar of bread. "Draw this along the edge of your sword," she said, "all the way from hilt to point, and it will disenchant the blade, and the king will never know what sword is there." "Will it still fight for me?" said Alveric. "No," said the witch. "But once you are over the frontier, take this script and wipe the blade with it on every spot that the false weight has touched." And she fumbled under her cloak again and drew forth a poem on parchment. "It will enchant it again," she said. And Alveric took the weight and the written thing. "Let not the two touch," warned the witch. And Alveric set them apart. "Once over the frontier," she said, "and he may move Elfland where he will, but you and the sword will be within his borders." "Mother witch," said Alveric, "will he be wroth with you if I do this?" "Wroth," said Zerundarel, "wroth. He will rage with a most exceeding fury, beyond the power of tigers." "I would not bring that on you, Mother Witch," said Alveric. "Ha!" said Zerundarel. "What care I?" Night was advancing now, and the moor and the air growing black like the witch's cloak. She was laughing now and merging into the darkness, and soon the night was all blackness and laughter, but he could see no witch. Then Alveric made his way back to his rocky camp by the light of its lonely fire. And as soon as morning appeared on the desolation, and all the useless rocks began to glow, he took the false weight and softly rubbed it along both sides of his sword, until all its magical edge was disenchanted. And he did this in his tent while his followers slept, for he would not let them know that he sought for help that came not from the ravings of Niv, nor from any sayings that Zend had had from the moon. Yet the troubled sleep of madness is not so deep that Niv did not watch him out of one wild, sly eye when he heard the false weight softly rasping the sword. And when this was secretly done and secretly watched, Alveric called to his two men, and they came and folded up his tattered tent, and took the long pole and hung their sorry belongings upon it. And on went Alveric, along the edge of the fields we know, impatient to come at last to the land that so long eluded him. And Niv and Zend came behind with the pole between them, with bundles swinging from it and tatters flying. They moved inland a little, towards the houses of men, to purchase the food they needed. And this they bought in the afternoon from a farmer who dwelt in a lonely house, so near to the very edge of the fields, we know that it must have been the last house in the visible world, and here they bought bread and oatmeal and cheese and a cured ham and other such things, and put them in sacks and slung them over their pole. Then they left the farmer and turned away from his fields and from all the fields of men. And as evening fell, they saw just over a hedge, lighting up the land with a soft, strange glow that they knew to be not of this earth, that barrier of twilight that is the frontier of Elfland. "Lyrazel!" shouted Alveric, and drew his sword and strode into the twilight. And behind him went Niv and Zend, with all their suspicions flaming now into jealousy of inspirations or magic that were not theirs. Once he called Lyrazel, then, little trusting his voice in that wide, weird land, he lifted his hunter's horn that hung by his side on a strap. He lifted it to his lips and sounded a call weary with so much wandering. He was standing within the edge of the boundary. The horn shone in the light of Elfland. Then Niv and Zend dropped their pole in that unearthly twilight, where it lay like the wreckage of some uncharted sea, and suddenly seized their master. "A land of dreams," said Niv. "Have I not dreams enough?" "There is no moon there," cried Zend. Alveric struck Zend on the shoulder with his sword, but the sword was disenchanted and blunt, and only harmed him slightly. Then the two seized the sword and dragged Alveric back, and the strength of the madman was beyond what one could believe. They dragged him back again to the fields we know, where they too were strange, and were jealous of other strangeness, and led him far from the sight of the pale blue mountains. He had not entered Elfland, but his horn had passed the boundary's edge and troubled the air of Elfland, uttering across its dreamy calm one long, sad earthly note. It was the horn that Lyrazel heard as she spoke with her father. Chapter 27. The Return of Lurelu. Over hamlet and castle of Earl, and through every nook and crevice of it, spring passed. A mild benediction that blessed the very air and sought out all living things, not missing even the tiny plants that had their dwelling in most secluded places, under eaves, in the cracks of old barrels, or along the lines of mortar that held ancient rows of stones. And in this season, Orion hunted no unicorns. Not that he knew in what season the unicorns bred in Elfland, where time is not as here, but because of a feeling he had from all his earthly forefathers against hunting any creature in this season of song and flowers. So he tended his hounds and often watched the hills, expecting on any day the return of Lurelu. And spring passed by, and the summer flowers grew, and still there was no sign of the troll returning. For time moves through the dells of Elfland, as over no field of man, and long Orion watched through fading evenings till the line of the hills was black, yet never saw the small round heads of trolls bobbing across the downs. And the long autumnal winds came sighing out of cold lands, and found Orion still watching for Lurelu. And the mist and the turning leaves spoke to his heart of hunting. And the hounds were whining for the open spaces and the line of scent like a mysterious path crossing the wide world. But Orion would hunt nothing less than unicorns, and waited yet for his trolls. And one of these earthly days, with a menace of frost in the air and a scarlet sunset, Lurelu's talk to the trolls in the wood being finished, and their scamper swifter than hares having brought them soon to the frontier, those in our fields who looked, as they seldom did, towards that mysterious border where earth ended, might have seen the unwanted shapes of the nimble trolls coming all grey through the evening. They came dropping, troll after troll, from the soaring leaps they took high through the boundary of twilight, and landing thus unceremoniously in our fields, came capering, somersaulting and running, with gusts of impudent laughter, as though this were a proper manner in which to approach by no means the least of the planets. They rustled by the small houses, like the wind passing through straw, and none that heard the light, rushing sound of their passing knew how outlandish they were, except the dogs, whose work it is to watch, and who know of all things that pass, their degree of remoteness to man. At gypsies, tramps, and all that go without houses, dogs bark whenever they pass. At the wild things of the woods, they bark with greater abhorrence, knowing well the rebellious contempt in which they hold man. At the fox, for his touch of mystery and his far wanderings, they bark more furiously. But tonight the barking of dogs was beyond all abhorrence and fury. Many a farmer this night believed that his dog was choking, and passing over these fields, staying not to laugh at the clumsy, scared running of sheep, for they kept their laughter for man. They came soon to the downs above Earl, and there below them was night and the smoke of men, all grey together. And not knowing from what slight causes the smoke arose, here from a woman boiling a kettle of water, or there because one dried the frock of a child, or that a few old men might warm their hands in the evening, the trolls forbore to laugh as they had planned to do as soon as they should meet with the things of man. Perhaps even they, whose gravest thoughts were just under the surface of laughter, even they were a little awed by the strangeness and nearness of man sleeping there in his hamlet, with all his smoke about him, though awe in these light minds rested no longer than does the squirrel on the thin extremest twigs. In a while, they lifted their eyes up from the valley, and there was the western sky still shining above the last of the gloaming, a little strip of colour and dying light, so lovely that they believed that another Elfland lay the other side of the valley. Two dim, diaphanous, magical Elfinlands hemming in this valley, and few fields of men close upon either side. And sitting there on the hillside, peering westward, the next thing they saw was a star. It was Venus, low in the west, brimming with blueness. And they all bowed their heads many times to this. Pale blue, beautiful stranger. For though politeness was rare with them, they saw that the evening star was nothing of earth, and no affair of man's, and believed it came out of that Elfland they did not know on the western side of the world. And more stars appeared, till the trolls were frightened, for they knew nothing of these glittering wanderers that could steal out of the darkness and shine. At first they said, "There are more trolls than stars," and were comforted, for they trusted greatly in numbers. Then there were soon more stars than trolls, and the trolls were ill at ease as they sat in the dark underneath all that multitude. But presently they forgot the fancy that troubled them, for no thought remained with them long. They turned their light attention instead to the yellow lights that glowed here and there on the hither side of the greyness, where a few of the houses of men stood warm and snug near the trolls. A beetle went by, and they hushed their chatter to hear what he would say, but he droned by, going home, and they did not know his language. A dog far off was ceaselessly crying out, and filling all the still night with a note of warning. And the trolls were angry at the sound of his voice, for they felt that he interfered between them and man. Then a soft whiteness came out of the night and lit on the branch of a tree, and bowed its head to the left and looked at the trolls. and then bowed over to the right and looked at them again from there, and then back to the left again, for it was not yet sure about them. "An owl," said Lurulu, and many besides Lurulu had seen his kind before, for he flies much along the edge of Elfland. Soon he was gone, and they heard him hunting across the hills and the hollows, and then no sound was left but the voices of men, or the shrill shouts of children, and the bay of the dog that warned men against the trolls. A sensible fellow, they said of the owl, for they liked the sound of his voice, but the voices of men and their dog sounded confused and tiresome. They saw sometimes the lights of late wayfarers crossing the downs towards Earl, or heard men that cheered themselves in the lonely night by singing instead of by lanterns' light. And all the while, the evening star grew bigger, and great trees grew blacker and blacker. Then from underneath the smoke and the mist of the stream, there boomed all of a sudden the brazen bell of the Freer, out of deep night in the valley. Night and the slopes of Earl and the dark downs echoed with it, and the echoes rode up to the trolls and seemed to challenge them with all accursed things and wandering spirits and bodies unblessed of the Freer. And the solemn sound of those echoes going alone through the night from every heavy swing of the holy bell cheered that band of trolls among all the strangeness of earth. For whatever is solemn always moves trolls to levity. They turned merrier now and tittered among themselves. And while they still watched all that host of stars, wondering if they were friendly, the sky grew steely blue, and the eastern stars dwindled, and the mist and the smoke of men turned white, and a radiance touched the further edge of the valley. And the moon came up over the downs behind the trolls. Then voices sang from the holy place of the Freer, chaunting moon matins, which it was their wont to sing on nights of the full moon, while the moon was yet low. And this rite they named Moon's Morning. The bell had ceased. Chance voices spoke no more. They had hushed their dog in the valley and silenced his warning. And lonely and grave and solemn, that people's song floated up from before the candles in their small square sacred place, built of grey stone by men that were dead for ages and ages. All solemn, the song welled up in the time of the moon's rising, grave as the night, mysterious as the full moon, and fraught with a meaning that was far beyond the highest thoughts of the trolls. Then the trolls leaped up with one accord from the frosted grass of the downs, and all poured down the valley to laugh at the ways of men, to mock at their sacred things, and to dare their singing with levity. Many a rabbit rose up and fled from their onrush, and thrills of laughter arose from the trolls at their fear. A meteor flashed westwards, racing after the sun, either as a portent to warn the hamlet of Earl that folk from beyond earth's borders approached them now, or else in fulfillment of some natural law. To the trolls, it seemed that one of the proud stars fell, and they rejoiced with elvish levity. Thus they came giggling through the night, and ran down the street of the village, unseen as any wild creature that roams late through the darkness. And Lurulu led them to the pigeon loft, and they all poured clambering in. Some rumour arose in the village that a fox had jumped into the pigeon loft, but it ceased almost as soon as the pigeons returned to their homes. And the folk of Earl had no more hint till the morning that something had entered their village from beyond the borders of earth. In a brown mass, thicker than young pigs, are along the edge of a trough, the trolls encumbered the floor of the pigeon's home. And time went over them, as over all earthly things. And well they knew, though tiny was their intelligence, that by crossing the border of twilight, they incurred the wasting of time. For nothing dwells by the brink of any. Danger and lives ignorant of its menace, as conies in rocky altitudes know the peril of the sheer cliff, so they that dwell near earth's border knew well the danger of time. And yet they came. The wonder and lure of earth had been overstrong for them. Does not many a young man squander youth as they squandered immortality? And Lurulu showed them how to hold off time for a while, which otherwise would make them older and older each moment, and whirl them on with earth's restlessness all night long. Then he curled up his knees and shut his eyes and lay still. This, he told them, was sleep, and cautioning them to continue to breathe, though being still in other respects, he then slept in earnest, and after some vain attempts, the brown trolls did the same. When sunrise came, awaking all earthly things, long rays came through the 30 little windows, and awoke both birds and trolls. And the mass of trolls went to the windows to look at earth, and the pigeons fluttered to rafters and jerked sidelong looks at the trolls. And there that heap of trolls would have stayed, crowded high on each other's shoulders, blocking the windows while they studied the variety and restlessness of earth, finding them equal to the strangest fables that wayfarers had brought to them out of our fields. And, though Lurulu often reminded them, they had forgotten the haughty white unicorns that they were to hunt with dogs. But Lurulu, after a while, led them down from the loft and brought them to the kennels. And they climbed up the high palings and peered over the top at the hounds. When the hounds saw those strange heads peering over the palings, they made a great uproar, and presently folk came to see what troubled the hounds. And when they saw that mass of trolls all round the top of the palings, they said to each other, and so said all that heard of it, "There is magic in Earl now." Chapter 28. A chapter on unicorn. Hunting. None in Earl was so busy, but that he came that morning to see the magic that was newly come out of Elfland, and to compare the trolls with all that the neighbours said of them. And the folk of Earl gazed much at the trolls, and the trolls at the folk of Earl. And there was great merriment, for, as often happens with minds of unequal weight, each laughed at the other. And the villagers found the impudent ways of the bare, brown, nimble trolls no funnier, no more meet for derision, than the trolls found the grave, high hats, the curious clothes, and the solemn air of the villagers. And Orion soon came too, and the folk of the village doffed their long, thin hats. And though the trolls would have laughed at him also, Lurulu had found his whip, and by means of it made the mob of his impudent brethren give that salutation that is given in Elfland to those of its royal line. When noonday came, which was the hour of dinner, and the folk turned from the kennels, they went back to their houses all praising the magic that was come at last to Earl. During the days that followed, Orion's hounds learned that it was vain to chase a troll, and unwise to snarl at one. For, apart from their elvish speed, the trolls were able to leap into the air far over the heads of the hounds, and when each had been given a whip, they could repay snarling with an aim that none on earth was able to equal, except those whose sires had carried a whip with hounds for generations. And one morning, Orion came to the pigeon loft and called to Lurulu early, and he brought out the trolls, and they went to the kennels, and Orion opened the doors, and he led them all away eastwards over the downs. The hounds moved all together, and the trolls with their whips ran beside them, like a flock of sheep surrounded by numbers of collies. They were away to the border of Elfland, to wait for the unicorns where they come through the twilight, to eat the earthly grasses at evening. And as our evening began to mellow the fields we know, they were come to the opal border that shut those fields from Elfland. And there they lurked as earth's darkness grew, and waited for the great unicorns. Each hound had its troll beside it, with the troll's right hand along its shoulder or neck, soothing it, calming it, and holding it still, while the left hand held the whip. The strange group lingered there motionless, and darkened there with the evening. And when earth was as dim and quiet as the unicorns desired, the great creatures came softly through, and were far into earth, before any troll would allow his hound to move. Thus, when Orion gave the signal, they easily cut one off from its elfin home, and hunted it snorting over those fields that are the portion of men. And night came down on the proud beast's magical gallop, and the hounds intoxicate with that marvellous scent, and the leaping, soaring trolls. And when jackdaws on the highest towers of Earl saw the rim of the sun all red above frosted fields, Orion came back from the downs with his hounds and his trolls, carrying as fine a head as a unicorn hunter could wish. The hounds, weary but glad, were soon curled up in their kennels, and Orion hung in his bed. While the trolls in their pigeon loft began to feel, as none but Luraloo had felt ever before, the weight and the weariness of the passing of time. All day Orion slept, and all his hounds, none of them caring how it slept or why, while the trolls slept anxiously, falling asleep as fast as ever they could, in the hope of escaping some of the fury of time, which they feared had begun to attack them. And that evening, while still they slept, hounds, trolls, and Orion, there met again in the forge of Narl, the Parliament of Earl. From the forge to the inner room came the 12 old men, rubbing their hands and smiling, ruddy with health and the keen north wind, and the cheerfulness of their forebodings. For they were well content at last that their lord was surely magic, and foresaw great doings in Earl. Folklings, said Narl to them all, naming them thus after an ancient wont, is it not well with us and our valley at last? See how it is as we planned so long ago. For our lord is a magic lord as we all desired, and magical things have sought him from over there, and they all obey his hests. It is so, said all but Gazik, a vendor of beeves. Little and old and out of the way was Earl, secluded in its deep valley, unnoticed in history. And the 12 men loved the place and would have it famous. And now they rejoiced as they heard the words of Narl. What other village, he said, has traffic with over there? And Gazik, though he rejoiced with the rest, rose up in a pause of their gladness. Many strange things, he said, have entered our village, coming from over there. And it may be that human folk are best, and the ways of the fields we know. Moth scorned him, and Threll. Magic is best, said all. And Gazik was silent again, and raised his voice no more against the many. And the mead went round, and all spoke of the fame of Earl, and Gazik forgot his mood and the fear that was in it. Far into the night they rejoiced, quaffing the mead, and by its homely aid gazing into the years of the future, so far as that may be done by the eyes of men. Yet all their rejoicing was hushed, and their voices low, lest the ears of the Freer should hear them, for their gladness came to them from lands that lay beyond thought of salvation, and they had set their trust in magic, against which, as well they knew, boomed every note that rang from the bell of the Freer whenever it tolled at evening. And they parted late, praising magic in no loud tones, and went secretly back to their houses, for they feared the curse that the Freer had called down upon unicorns, and knew not if their own names might become involved in one of the curses called upon magical things. All the next day, Orion rested his hounds, and the trolls and the people of Earl gazed at each other. But on the day that followed, Orion took his sword and gathered his band of trolls and his pack of hounds, and all were away once more far over the downs, to come again to the border of nebulous opal, and to lurk for the unicorns coming through in the evening. They came to a part of the border far from the spot which they had disturbed only 3 evenings before, and Orion was guided by the chattering trolls, for well they knew the haunts of the lonely unicorns. And Earth's evening came huge and hushed, till all was dim as the twilight, and never a footfall did they hear of the unicorns, never a glimpse of their whiteness. And yet the trolls had guided Orion well, for just as he would have despaired of a hunt that night, just when the evening seemed wholly and utterly empty, a unicorn stood on the earthward edge of the twilight, where nothing had stood only a moment before. Soon he moved slowly across the terrestrial grasses a few yards forward into the fields of men. Another followed, moving a few yards also. And then they stood for 15 of our earthly minutes, moving nothing at all except their ears. And all that, while the trolls hushed every hound, motionless under a hedge of the fields we know. Darkness had all but hidden them when at last the unicorns moved, and as soon as the largest was far enough from the frontier, the trolls let loose every hound pair and ran with them after the unicorn, with shrill yells of derision, all sure of his haughty head. But the quick, small minds of the trolls, though they had learned much of earth, had not yet understood the irregularity of the moon. Darkness was new to them, and they soon lost hounds. Orion, in his eagerness to hunt, had made no choice of a suitable night. There was no moon at all, and would be none till near morning. Soon he also fell behind. Orion easily collected the trolls. The night was full of their frivolous noises, and the trolls came to his horn, but not a hound would leave that pungent magical scent for any horn of man. They straggled back next day, tired, having lost their unicorn. And while each troll cleaned and fed his hound on the evening after the hunt, and laid a little bunch of straw for it on which to lie down, and smoothed its hair, and looked for thorns in its feet, and unravelled burrs from its ears, Lurelu sat alone, fastening his small, sharp intelligence, like the little white light of a burning glass, for hours upon one question. The question that Lurelu pondered far into the night was how to hunt unicorns with dogs in the darkness, and by midnight a plan was clear in his elvish mind. Chapter 29. The luring of the people of the marshes. As the evening that followed was beginning to fade, a traveller might have been seen approaching the marshes, which some way southeastwards of Earl lay along the edge of the farmsteads and stretched their terrible waste as far as the skyline, and even over the border and into the region of Elfland. They glimmered now as the light was leaving the land. So black were the solemn clothes and the high grave hat of the traveller that he could have been seen from far against the dim green of the field, going down to the edge of the marsh through the grey evening. But none were there to see at such an hour beside that desolate place, for the threat of darkness was already felt in the fields, and all the cows were home, and the farmers warm in their houses. So the traveller walked alone, and soon he was come by unsure paths to the reeds and the thin rushes, to which a wind was telling tales that have no meaning to man. long histories of bleakness and ancient legends of rain. While on the high, darkening land far off behind him, he saw lights begin to blink where the houses were. He walked with the gravity and the solemn air of one who has important business with men, yet his back was turned to their houses, and he went where no man wandered, travelling towards no hamlet or lonely cottage of man, for the marsh ran right into Elfland. Between him and the nebulous border that divides earth from Elfland, there was no man whatever. And yet the traveller walked on as one that has a grave errand. With every venerable step that he took, bright mosses shook, and the marsh seemed about to engulf him, while his worthy staff sank deep into slime, giving him no support. And yet the traveller seemed only to care for the solemnity of his pacing. Thus he went on over the deadly marsh, with a deportment suitable to the slow procession when the elders open the market on special days. And the gravest blesses the bargaining, and all the farmers come to the booths and barter. And up and down, songbirds went wavering home, skirting the marsh's edge on their way to their native hedges. Pigeons passed landward to roost in high dark trees. The last of a multitude of rooks was gone, and all the air was empty. And now the great marsh thrilled to the news of the coming of a stranger. For no sooner had the traveller gravely set a foot on one of those brilliant mosses that bloom in the pools, than a thrill shot under their roots and below the stems of the bulrushes, and ran like a light beneath the surface of the water, or like the sound of a song, and passed far over the marshes, and came quivering to the border of magical twilight that divides Elfland from earth, and stayed not there, but troubled the very border, and passed beyond it, and was felt in Elfland. For where the great marshes run down to the border of earth, the frontier is thinner and more uncertain than elsewhere. And as soon as they felt that thrill in the deep of the marshes, the will-o'-the-wisps soared up from their fathomless homes, and waved their lights to beckon the traveller on, over the quaking mosses at the hour when the duck were flighting. And under that whir and rush and rejoicing of wings that the ducks make in that hour, the traveller followed after the waving lights, further and further into the marshes. Yet sometimes he turned from them, so that for a while they followed him, instead of leading as they were accustomed to do, till they could get round in front of him and lead him once more. A watcher, if there had been one, in such bad light and in such a perilous place, had noticed after a while, in the venerable traveller's movements, a queer resemblance to those of the hen-green plover when she lures the stranger after her in spring, away from the mossy bank where her eggs lie bare. Or perhaps such a resemblance is merely fanciful, and a watcher might have noticed no such thing. At any rate, on that night in that desolate place, there was no watcher whatever, and the traveller followed his curious course, sometimes towards the dangerous mosses, sometimes towards the safe green land, always with grave demeanour and reverent gait, and the will-o'-the-wisps in multitudes gathered about him. And still that deep thrill that warned the marsh of a stranger throbbed on through the ooze below the roots of the rushes, and did not cease, as it should as soon as the stranger was dead, but haunted the marsh like some echo of music that magic has made everlasting, and troubled the will-o'-the-wisps even over the border in Elfland. Now it is far from my intention to write anything detrimental to will-o'-the-wisps, or anything that may be construed as being a slight upon them. No such construction should be put upon my writings. But it is well known that the people of the marshes lure travellers to their doom, and have delighted to follow that avocation for centuries. And I may be permitted to mention this in no spirit of disapproval, The will-o'-the-wisps then that were about this traveller redoubled their efforts with fury, and when still he eluded their last enticements, only on the very edge of the deadliest pools, and still lived and still travelled, and the whole marsh knew of it, then the greater will-o'-the-wisps that dwell in Elfland rose up from their magical mire and rushed over the border. And the whole marsh was troubled. Almost like little moons grown nimbly impudent, the people of the marshes glowed before that solemn traveller, leading his reverend steps to the edge of death, only to retrace their steps again to beckon him back once more. And then, in spite of the great height of his hat and the dark length of his coat, that frivolous people began to perceive that mosses were bearing his weight, which never before had supported any traveller. At this, their fury increased, and they all leaped nearer to him. And nearer they flocked wherever he went. And in their fury, their enticements were losing their craftiness. And now a watcher in the marshes, if such there had been, had seen something more than a traveller surrounded by will-o'-the-wisps. For he might have noticed that the traveller was almost leading them, instead of the will-o'-the-wisps leading the traveller. And in their impatience to have him dead, the people of the marshes had never thought that they were all coming nearer and nearer to the dry land. And when all was dark, but the water, they suddenly found themselves in a field of grass with their feet rasping against the rough pasture, while the traveller was seated with his knees gathered up to his chin and was eyeing them from under the brim of his high black hat. Never before had any of them been lured to dry land by traveller, and there were amongst them that night those eldest and greatest among them, who had come with their moonlight lights right over the border from Elfland. They looked at each other in uneasy astonishment as they dropped limply onto the grass, for the roughness and heaviness of the solid land oppressed them after the marshes. And then they began to perceive that that venerable traveller, whose bright eyes watched them so keenly out of that black mass of clothes, was little larger than they were themselves, in spite of his reverend airs. Indeed, though stouter and rounder, he was not quite so tall. Who was this? They began to mutter. Who had lured? Will-o'-the-wisps. And some of those elders from Elfland went up to him, that they might ask him with what audacity he had dared to lure such as them. And then the traveller spoke. Without rising or turning his head, he spoke where he sat. "People of the marshes," he said, "do you love unicorns?" And at the word unicorns, scorn and laughter filled every tiny heart in all that frivolous multitude, excluding all other emotions, so that they forgot their petulance at having been lured, although to lure. Will-o'-the-wisps is held by them to be the gravest of insults, and never would they have forgiven it if they had had longer memories. At the word unicorns, they all giggled in silence, and this they did by flickering up and down like the light of a little mirror flashed by an impudent hand. Unicorns! Little love had they for the haughty creatures. Let them learn to speak to the people of the marshes when they came to drink at their pools. Let them learn to give their due to the great lights of Elfland, and the lesser lights that illumine the marshes of earth. "No," said an elder of the will-o'-the-wisps. "None loves the proud unicorns." "Come then," said the traveller, "and we will hunt them, and you shall light us in the night with your light when we hunt them with dogs over the fields of men." "Venerable traveller," said that elder will-o'-the-wisp. But at those words the traveller flung up his hat and leaped from his long black coat and stood before the will-o'-the-wisps stark naked. And the people of the marshes saw that it was a troll that had tricked them. Their anger at this was slight, for the people of the marshes have tricked the trolls, and the trolls have tricked the people of the marshes, each of them so many times for ages and ages, that only the wisest among them can say which has tricked the other most, and is how many tricks ahead. They consoled themselves now by thinking of times when trolls had been made to look ludicrous, and consented to come with their lights to help to hunt unicorns, for their wills were weak when they stood on the dry land, and they easily acquiesced in any suggestion or followed anyone's whim. It was Lurelu who had thus tricked the will-o'-the-wisps, knowing well how they loved to lure travellers, and having obtained the highest hat and gravest coat he could steal, he had set out with a bait that he knew would bring them from great distances, now that he had gathered them all on the solid land, and had their promise of light and help against unicorns, which such creatures will give easily on account of the unicorn's pride. He began to lead them away to the village of Earl, slowly at first, while their feet grew accustomed to the hard land, and over the fields he brought them, limping to Earl. And now there was nothing in all the marshes that at all resembled man, and the geese came down on a huge tumult of wings. The little swift teal shot home, and all the dark air twanged with the flight of the duck. That is the end of tonight's reading. Alveric is close. Not there yet, not across the border, not reunited with anything he has lost, but closer than he has been since the beginning. The marshes are behind him. The quality of the air is changing, and somewhere ahead, the wall of twilight. The unicorn has turned and faced Orion. After all the chasing, after all the miles and all the hours in the dark forest, the creature from Elfland has stopped running and turned. And Orion has stopped too. And they are looking at each other across a clearing, in the way that two things look at each other when they have finally run out of distance between them. And Lyrasil, in Elfland, has seen the fields we know, not remembered them this time, seen them, the actual smoke of the actual chimneys of Earl, rising in the actual grey morning air, just across the border, just on the other side of the thing her father wrote. One episode remains. Everything that has been building across 8 episodes, across years of wandering and longing and grief, is arriving at something. Dunsany will not resolve it the way you expect. He never does. Episode 9. The last rune will be here soon. Moth is asleep. You can be too. Continue to listen to music by Velikor Dark Academia.